people of their own kind, even worse than men of their own kind, who know the people's sores. You had organization of youth and women and ethnic minorities and all these people who are supposed to be quiet. They're just supposed to do their job. And that, the naive might call that democracy, but the smart guys understand that that's a crisis of democracy that has to be overcome. And the way you have to overcome it is by restoring the people to apathy and obedience so they don't get in the way. And of course you're doing it for their own good, remember, because they are so stupid and ignorant that they're just going to get in trouble. It's like letting a 3-year-old run across the street. It wouldn't be decent to do that. And that's what the crisis of democracy is about. Well, summarizing briefly, there's two views of the topic of indoctrination and democracy. One view is the standard one. It's the one I quoted from Justice Powell, and that's at the rhetorical level, that's the one that everybody's supposed to hold. The people should assert meaningful control over the political process, and for that they have to have free access to information and so on. Then there's another view, which in fact is probably the standard view, and that is that the people are a dangerous enemy, and they have to be controlled for their own good, and for that you need necessary illusions and emotionally potent oversimplifications and manufactured consent and the rest of the stuff that the specialized class or their representatives have to carry out. Well, with regard to the media, there's also a standard view, and it's again the one that Justice Powell expressed. They're supposed to fulfill the traditional Jeffersonian role of being a counterweight to concentrated power. And the standard view is that that's what they do. Now, there is a debate over the media, but the debate is over whether they go too far in performing this necessary service. Do they go so far in their adversarial, confrontational attitude towards power that they're going beyond responsible limits? Maybe they're going so far in attacking power and attacking existing institutions that they're actually undermining the functioning of democracy. And there is a big, vigorous debate over that. The Trilateral Commission report, for example, felt that that was true and felt that unless the media can become more responsible and stop being so confrontational, they'll have to be curbed. If they can't curb themselves, they'll have to be curbed by legislation. And the same message is implicit in a Freedom House study of the media at the same time. They claim that the media lost the war by being so confrontational and hating power so much and so on. And as I say, there's a very lively debate over that issue. The debate is between the people who say, yeah, the media are too confrontational, they're too adversarial, and then there are the others who say, just to quote another, Justice Gerfine this time, we have a cantankerous press, an obstinate press, a ubiquitous press, but it must be suffered by those in authority in order to preserve the even greater values of freedom of expression and the right of the people to know, fulfilling the traditional Jeffersonian role. Well, that's the debate, and it's a lively one. Now, outside of the spectrum of debate, there happens to be another position. The other position challenges the factual assumption that's taken for granted in the debate. According to this alternative view, the media don't fulfill any sort of traditional Jeffersonian role. They fulfill a societal purpose, all right, but it's quite a different one. Their societal purpose is the one that is advocated by elites, namely to inculcate and to defend the economic and social and political agenda of the privileged groups that dominate the domestic society. They want to ensure that those who own the country will be able to govern it, to refer back to the founding principle of the Founding Fathers. And they do this in all sorts of ways, by selection of topics, by distribution of concerns, by emphasis and framing of issues, by filtering of information, by outright lying sometimes, by bounding of debate within certain limits. There may incidentally be a liberal bias to some extent, as is constantly claimed. In fact, if the system functions well, it ought to have a liberal bias, or at least appear to, because if it appears to have a liberal bias, that will serve to bound thought even more effectively. In other words, if the press is indeed adversarial and liberal and all these bad things, then how can I go beyond it? They're already so extreme in their opposition to power that to go beyond it would be to take off from the planet. So therefore it must be that the presuppositions that are accepted in the liberal media are sacrosanct, can't go beyond them. And a well-functioning system would in fact have a bias of that kind. The media would then serve to say, in effect, thus far and no further. And the presuppositions that are accepted and never even discussed are then the foundation of thinkable thought within the limits that are defined by those presuppositions. You can have plenty of debate, but you can't transcend it. So to take one issue that was discussed and debated over decades, take, say, the U.S. wars in Indochina. There certainly was a debate, certainly by the late 60s. The debate was between the hawks and the doves. The hawks were people like, say, Joseph Alsop, right-wing journalist, hawkish journalist, who said that if we keep at it with enough intensity and vigor and violence and all those good things, we'll be able to win the war we'll be able to defend South Vietnam successfully. And then there were the doves, like, for example, Arthur Schlesinger, who wrote that we all pray that Mr. Alsop will be right, and if he is, we'll all be praising the wisdom and statesmanship of the American government in reducing Vietnam to a land of ruin and wreck, as he described what was happening. But since he's a dove, he doesn't think he's right. So the task of defending South Vietnam is obviously a noble cause. Defending a country is always noble. But we probably can't get away with it, or it'll be too bloody, or something like that. That makes you a dove. Now, there again is another position. The other position is that we're not defending South Vietnam at all. We're attacking South Vietnam, and we certainly attacked it ever since John F. Kennedy sent the American Air Force to start bombing it in 1962, if not before. And after that, we just attacked it outright. That point of view, which is outside the debate, notice, it's neither a hawk nor a dove position, happens to be the view that was held by the majority of the American public, but it's outside the debate. And it has one thing for it, namely it's plainly true, but it has one thing against it, namely it's plainly true. Therefore, it's inexpressible, and it's outside the framework of debate, and it was outside the framework of debate. You have to look very hard. In fact, I've never succeeded since John F. Kennedy sent the American Air Force to bomb South Vietnam. I've been looking for this. I've never found a phrase in the media, or for that matter in academic scholarship, suggesting that the United States was attacking South Vietnam, except in unspeakable literature of the kind that I write and so on. But in anything minimally respectable, that doesn't offend people, I can't find that phrase ever mentioned. It's kind of interesting if you think about it. I mean, for example, the Soviet press, which is plainly controlled party press, was capable of seeing that the Soviet Union was invading Afghanistan, not just defending it. And that's worth pondering. But the point is that the liberal bias plays a role in defining the dove position. We're defending South Vietnam, and maybe it's unwise. That's the limits of thought. And the same is true on just about every topic. Notice that the assumption that the press is adversarial and confrontational is a highly functional assumption. It plays a role in instilling necessary illusions, namely the ones that the allegedly confrontational press adheres to. Correspondingly, it follows that no challenge to this should be permitted. Now, this alternative view that I've described, a view that my co-author Edward Herman and I call a propaganda model of the media, which just challenges the assumption, is therefore dysfunctional. And the propaganda model itself predicts that it cannot become part of the debate. The reason is it's dysfunctional, and dysfunctional things are not allowed into a propaganda system. So therefore, the debate will rage, you can predict, between those who say the media are too confrontational and those who say, well, we have to tolerate them because what can we do? That prediction of the propaganda model incidentally is very well confirmed. There's a lot of debate about the media, but you won't find this option discussed within it. Can't be conceived of. And that's a kind of an interesting fact if you think about it for at least three reasons. One reason is that the propaganda model happens to be advocated by elites and has been advocated by elites for years. In other words, the normative position that this is the way the media ought to operate is a very standard position. So therefore, you'd think that the descriptive comment that they do operate this way would at least be part of the discussion. A second reason is, quite apart from elite advocacy, that the propaganda model has a lot of prior plausibility on quite uncontroversial assumptions. Just take uncontroversial institutional